Someone asked recently a very good question. They said, how do I make so that my VCU obeys the discharge current limit that we're receiving from the battery? So this is the simplest way to do it, is this page, I1 current limit feedback. And what that's going to do is the VCU receives backpack DCL that's coming from the BMS, right? If you have an external like an Orion BMS, if you have an internal BMS like an AEM BMS 18, then those calculations happen inside the VCU, but they still get put into the same place. The result is this backpack DCL number of 1,000 amps or whatever. There's a couple other user options you can adjust. For instance, if the inverter is calculating that 1,000 amps is safe, but you as the vehicle builder know that you don't want to pull more than you don't want to pull 1,000 amps out of your pack for whatever reason, right? Maybe you've got a bus bar, or just you don't want to go all the way to what it can possibly tolerate. You could punch in this user option number, BAT DCL cal. BAT DCL cal is just a number you can set for the discharge current limit, like a maximum. So even if your Orion BMS is telling you you can have 9,000 amps or something crazy like that, over here you could tell it, no, we want 600 to be safe. And the results of that go over to this calculation inverter 1 MCL. That stands for motoring current limit. It's basically the same thing, but from the perspective of the inverter. If you did have somehow a setup, this is rare, but if you had a setup with multiple inverters, like a dual motor, you could say that, well, my pack can draw 1,600 amps, or 1,000 because our BMS says 1,000. But we know that each of our two inverters, somehow they're small inverters. Maybe they can only do 500 amps each. So now your inverter 1 current limit is set to 500. That's why there's two different numbers in here. This third one here is ramp current limit cal. That's just a number for testing. If you didn't want to change these, you just wanted to test, let's see how it behaves at 200 amps of current limit. So I'm going to leave these numbers. We're going to see here that the number from the BMS is 1,000. This user option is 1,600. This number MCL is 500, but I've set this number to 200 amps. And what we've got here is this 3 amps is just a simulated number. I've got a simulator on my benchtop. I'm not hooked to a real inverter. But if I tell that we have 100 amps, then our torque limit hasn't changed, right? This torque limit fraction here happens. But if we exceed this number, what's going to happen is this ramping current is going to ramp our limit down. And I'm going to just watch this number here while I adjust it on my simulator. Right, as our current goes up, what's eventually going to happen is it's going to go above 200 amps. And you can see there that fraction, that multiplier, that's a torque limit multiplier. So whatever our original torque limit was, it's now 0.95 of the original number. And you can see that it kind of ramped down slowly. I'm going to bring the inverter current back down under our limit. It's going to ramp back up slowly. So there's two options here. It's pretty simple. This 0.95 is how low can we go of a multiplier. So 0.95, that's only taking away 5%. That's probably not enough for most vehicles to do much. You probably want to set that much lower than 0.95. I'm going to set it to 0.25 now, and then do that same test again where I have the current exceed our limit. And what's going to happen here is this allowed torque is going to drop and drop and drop. And it's going to keep dropping until it goes all the way down to 0.25. Now that current is ramping down pretty slowly. This is probably so slow that it wouldn't be useful for most vehicles. And the speed of that ramp rate is set by this number here, which is set to 0.0001. And I think that is, I mean, from the look of it, this is probably going about half as quickly as I'd like it to. So I'm going to double it. And then I'm going to change the current, the simulated current again. And it's going to go back up, 33%, 35. That's still slower than I want. So let's put it to 0.01 amps. That's probably closer to what we want to see. Let's change my simulated current again. Yeah, that's going to drag down the torque at a reasonable speed. And if you said you want it to go all the way down to zero, right, zero torque, you could set this to 0. But be careful, because that'll make a vehicle not drive at all, and that might not be what you want. This is now going to drag the torque down until it's completely 0 torque output, which, again, that's a far cry from our original number of 0.95. So I'm going to set this to 0.25, give us some torque, but much less than it originally had. And I'm going to keep this ramp rate here. That's the easiest way to make it obey the discharge current limit. Now, there is another method. The only downside of this method is that it doesn't predict how close you are, right? If the actual inverter current is sitting very, very close to your current limit, and I suppose I should move this ramp, this cal number out of the way, right? Because we've tested that it behaves, and we see how it behaves at 200 amps. And I suppose we should go up to our 500 amps limit, right? And I also suppose I should put these on the same scale, shouldn't I? Let's put all these on the same scale. 0 on the left, 1500 amps on the right. Okay, there we go. So now our inverter current, I'm going to move that on the simulator again. It's no longer changing because we're above 200 amps, but it's going to be now above 500 amps. It's going to start dragging current down. And if it goes, right, if the current goes back down, then the torque multiplier is going to go back up. But what you could have happen is kind of ride this limit, right? There's going to be some amount of torque that drops the current enough, and because your torque limit goes away, your current is likely to go back up. So that in practice, this may kind of feel like a power fluctuation or a power oscillation. It might not feel nice to the driver of the vehicle. So there is another method you can use. It's a little more complicated, but the result ends up being pretty smooth. So that other method is this one, I1 current limit feed forward. Now this has a bit more going on. Some of these are just copies of what you already saw. So we've got backpack DCL, right, coming from the the BMS. You've got BAT DCL cal, which is that same user option that we could adjust if we know our pack cannot tolerate, the same numbers that our BMS is telling us. We've got MCL cal over here, again, same thing. We've got a few things like that, but for charge current, we're not going to worry about charge current just yet, but that is there too. And what we have now is, this is a feed forward, so it's a predictive method, and what it's going to do is it's going to completely ignore the inverter current. It could work if you weren't even measuring current for whatever reason. What this is going to do is it's going to predict based on your pack voltage and your inverter current limit. So we have 400 volts, 500 amps allowed. It multiplies those together to get a kilowatts power number. So that multiplies 400 times 500 gets you 200,000 watts, 200 kilowatts. And if I were to, let's think, to make this math a little easier, if I was to go 100 amps allowed from 400 volts, that's a little easier math, right? We've got 400 times 100 gets you 40 kilowatts. And if we doubled our current, that gets us 80 kilowatts. And if we went back to our original 500 amps, that gets us 200 kilowatts of electric power allowed. There's some math behind the scenes that's converting those electric power into electric torque based on your power limit and your motor speed. So I've got my simulator saying the motor speed is 5,980 RPM. And if I go and change that as our speed goes down, you can see here that our allowed torque goes up, right? With lower speed, it takes more torque to hit the same power. And so you can kind of see is that if we started at a low RPM, at a low motor speed, and then our motor speed went up, what's going to happen is this calculated torque limit is going to decrease in order to keep our current, or basically our power, is going to stay the same. And you may notice, well, there's a bit more going on. There's this giant table here, there's a multiplier here, and there's this whole other thing over here that's kind of similar but not the same. What those are doing is your motor is not going to be 100% efficient at converting energy from electric power into mechanical power. So that's what this table here is for. You can punch in this table how efficient your motor is, and you'll kind of have to need to do this by trial and error. Excuse me. I suppose you might have info from about your motor and about your inverter, but what we did was we just ran a vehicle at a low current limit, right? Let's say that we set that to 200 amps or whatever. That gives us a certain amount of Newton meters, 191 Newton meters. If we set this table to 100% efficiency, then our torque limit would be the same number, this approximately 190 Newton meters. And I think that is my current limit feedback getting in the way? No, it's not. That's good. But anyway, if it was 100% efficient, then you would request the 190 Newton meters that was calculated over here. But because the motor is not actually 100% efficient, say you were losing 10% in just heat or whatever, what that means is that you're actually needing to decrease that torque limit to avoid going over your current limit. And the numbers that were in this table, I forget what they were, maybe 75. The numbers that were in this table were the result of some dyno testing. At AEM, we had to test the large drive on a vehicle with a 400-ish volts battery system. And these are the numbers that we found it to need, is that low RPM, the motor was less efficient, so you couldn't draw the full calculated numbers here. You had to give it some I guess error factor, or basically you have to just account for that inefficiency, where if we did draw this 191 Newton meters, we would have had more than 200 amps of current. And so we would go in here and turn this efficiency number down, and if you turn this efficiency number down, what's going to happen is the torque limit is going to go down, and then the current drawn by the motor is also going to go down. So that's how this would be. If you want to be really conservative and really safe, you would set this to very low numbers, like say 50% efficiency, and then you would run the vehicle and watch to see how close your actual inverter current is against your limit. Oh, and I guess this number up here, this DC bus current, that's just a simulated number. It doesn't, you can see I can change it here higher or lower, and it's not going to affect any of these calculated numbers over here. And the good thing about that is that you're not going to get that sort of seesaw oscillation, like weird power feeling. It's going to feel smooth to the driver when this limit happens. They're going to give it full throttle. It's going to, before any current gets drawn at all, it's going to say, look, we know that we're at 400 volts and a 200 amps limit, so therefore we only get 200-ish Newton meters or 103 Newton meters or whatever it ends up being because of your efficiency numbers here. But because of that, you'll avoid, if these tables are tuned nicely, you'll avoid exceeding your discharge current limit in the first place, and that second set of feedback things won't have to kick in at all. And so you could set this depending on how close you want to get to that current limit. You could set this very close so that you're just a few amps below the current limit. You could set it so that it actually is above the current limit and this feedback is kicking in and doing things. There's also the y-axis of this table is the calculated torque limit. So if we, let's think, if I changed my discharge limit from 200 up to 300 or 400 or whatever, then our calculated torque limit is different. So here we've got 300 Newton meters calculated, and we're running through the 300 cell here. If I change this number higher, we would be calculating a higher number, that's 600 Newton meters, so we're up high on this cell. So if you did find that you really wanted to fine tune this thing so that it's very, very accurate, no matter what your torque request is looking like, you've got a lot of cells to manipulate. But what we found is you can usually get it quite close by just based on RPM. The efficiency didn't have really, really large changes between 100 Newton meters and 400 Newton meters, at least not on a certain Tesla large drive that we were testing with. This same set of things is happening for regen current. And do I have a way to display that? No, I don't have an easy way to display the regen right now. But there are similar, oh, I guess I do. The similar things are happening over here on the these second cells. These are negative numbers, so that's for regen. So you do have efficiency numbers for regen as well, and they're not always going to be the same. What we found is they're not always going to need the same efficiency numbers when it's doing regen versus when it's doing drawing power out of the motor. But you can adjust these so that you don't go over your charge current limit from your BMS as well. And yeah, that was a whole lot in one video, so thanks if you're still sticking around paying attention. There is this number of it's just like a multiplier on top of the table. So if we had it set to, let's go back to 100, so the numbers are easy. All right, we have 622 Newton meters here, 622 Newton meters there. This is like a very quick multiplier. If you wanted to, like if you didn't want to sit and adjust all the numbers in this table at once, you could adjust this one just to see if you think your table is 5 or 10% low everywhere. You could make this change here without needing to adjust the entire table. But in general, set that to about 1. Set this table to be very safe. You could set it down to 50. You probably will need it to be up in the 90s at high motor speed. You'll probably need it to be in the 90s. If you set it to maybe 80 at high motor speed, that's a pretty good starting point. And then yeah, just depending on how safe or conservative you really need to be, you could set these to start low, and you'll be way below your current limit, and the car will feel slow. And then adjust these up based on the actual current versus the predicted current limit, and you'll probably end up finding something that has a little bit higher numbers in the medium RPMs. And then I do think this 80 number is probably quite low, but something like that would be a good starting point, and then you can adjust up from there. Yeah, thanks for watching. I hope that helps somebody, and we'll hope to make a few more videos based on what other people need.